Some projects don't fail because they're impossible. They fail because nobody really understands them. This is a 1978 Volkswagen Beetle. It's great, but it hasn't driven in almost 20 years. Because even though this car is completely covered in dust and dirt, it is restored, it has been repainted in the past, and it's also completely rust-free. But it doesn't drive. So today I'm going to get started on a project that should have been done a long time ago. This Beetle isn't just another project car. This one has history, and most of that history is tied to my good friend Pascal. Pascal bought this car 20 years ago. Back then, he didn't know how to work on cars yet. So whenever something needed to be done, it went straight to a professional workshop. And at first, that makes total sense. You trust the professionals, you pay the bill, and you just want to drive your car. But over the years, this Beetle started developing a pattern. The engine would run into trouble, and instead of being rebuilt, it would simply be swapped for another one. That happened 3 times. 3 different engines. 3 times hoping that this one would finally be the solution. And the problem with that approach is simple. If you don't understand why an engine fails, you're almost guaranteed to see the same problems again. Eventually, this engine started knocking. The problem this time was worn conrod bearings. And by that point, the costs, the frustration and the disappointment had piled up. So the Beetle was parked here in this garage. And it stayed there. Years went by, the car collected dust, not because it wasn't loved, but because every time Pascal looked at it, it reminded him of money spent, problems repeated, and a project that never really moved forward. And during those same years, something else changed. We both started working on our cars, by doing, by trying, and by making mistakes. Engines that once felt impossible slowly became understandable. And at some point, this Beetle came up in conversation again. Not as a problem, but as a challenge. Because now, instead of asking someone else to fix it for us, we want to do it ourselves. This car deserves better than another tired engine swap. It deserves to be done properly. And that's why, after all these years, we're finally bringing the Beetle back out of the garage. The engine broke down 3 times already.
Right, 3 times. Yeah.
Since we both didn't know how to range, it just stranded in your garage, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was basically a thing because the car is tax-free, and it has no cost just sitting.
Yeah.
So it's not that you have to pay monthly amount of money for the car, to keep it insured and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it will come someday,
Yeah, I get that.
Someday. Maybe you should know it'll come someday.
Yeah.
20 years later.
Well, I think it's a bit harder when you don't know how to rebuild an engine.
Right.
And you have to get everything done at the garage, which is again really expensive, especially when fully restoring something.
Yep.
But I do think it's fun. In the past few years, well, we've known each other for 8 years already, that we kind of learned to wrench together, because I know that my very first project car, my CRX, I did at your garage back then, and we tried to swap it.
Yeah.
And we both didn't know what we were doing.
No, but it sort of went okay.
Yeah, but it took 2 years.
Yeah, but alongside everyday working and a lot of how do you say distance to cover to get there.
Yeah, and a lot of learning. I think we've learned a lot during the past few years, because we've worked on quite a bit of cars together. Yeah, true.
So
now it's finally time.
It is funny
to try and do that car.
Yeah, but it's funny actually. It's almost like the car is been sitting there waiting for us to do that when we got the knowledge to do it.
Yeah, I guess
it's
so.
Funny.
So it's better that you didn't sell it back then, even though it died 3 times again.
Yeah, that was that, you know. It's like, oh, again, fuck it, let it sit.
Yeah, but I think, because we both have never worked on a car like this before, but I think we can fix it now with all of the knowledge that we've acquired, which is mostly Volvo knowledge, but I think we should be able to do this, right?
Yeah, I think we can.
After a 1-hour drive, the Beetle has finally arrived, and this is the garage where we're going to bring it back to life. And for those of you that are subscribed, yes, this is a new garage. I'll get to that later, but for now, let's get to work on the Beetle. And with that, we got started hands-on with this project. Neither of us has ever worked on a Beetle before, so we started with the most obvious step, giving ourselves some space. Which, in this case, meant removing the hood. Or trunk lid, however you want to call it on the Beetle. And with the hood out of the way, we could clearly see the entire engine sitting there in front of us. Once that was out of the way, we moved on to disconnecting everything around the engine. And honestly, at this stage, we didn't want to overthink it. To get to the inside of the engine, everything on the outside has to come off anyway. So, rather than following a strict order, we just focused on taking things apart carefully, one step at a time. That meant that the first thing I did was remove those big air hoses that take up a lot of space in the engine bay. After that, I moved on to removing the first large tin plate at the front of the engine. It's held in place by 2 smaller covers and a few simple screws. And I have to admit, Pascal and I were a little surprised to find screws there instead of bolts. But in the end, they did exactly what they're supposed to do, and luckily, they all came loose without much trouble. Next, we disconnected the wiring harness, if you can call it that. Compared to our usual Volvos, it barely had any wires. And of course, this engine is different from anything we're used to in plenty other ways too.
So, this turns easy. Did you know that the engine only got 25 horsepower?
Before we started on this car, we had heard some horror stories about the alternator wiring. That you have to be extremely careful loosening the nuts, as you're not supposed to turn the threads they're attached to. Luckily, so far we haven't run into any of those issues, which gave us that satisfying feeling that this project is finally going in our favor. This part was going so smoothly, I really had to look twice if we didn't miss anything. And once all the wires were safely disconnected, the one thing remaining on the top side of the engine was the throttle cable. We think we have now disconnected everything on the top side, so now we're going to jack up this car and then loosen the bolts that are on the underside, and I think that's it. I think this is quite easy, but yeah, let's give it a go. Now it was time to jack the car up and see if we could get the engine out from underneath. Ideally, we'd be using a proper car lift, but since our garage doesn't have space for a long-term project, we had to work from the floor. this part made us a little nervous. The engine sits high and we weren't completely sure if the jack stands would be high enough. But after watching others tackle this online, we felt confident we would make it work too. It took us a second to locate the bolts, but we eventually figured it out. Alright, got 1 out of 4 bolts out, and I think it's funny that this car doesn't use normal engine mounts and it's just 4 of these bolts connecting the engine to the gearbox, keeping the engine in place. Since the engine's coming out, we needed to support it from underneath to make sure it didn't just drop. We're using a car jack so we can carefully lower it and then roll it out from under the car. Since space is so tight, we decided to remove the wheel, hoping to pull the engine out through the wheel arch. To make that work, we had to rotate the car jack 90 degrees, so we could move the engine to the side instead of straight out of the back. But first, I needed to remove a section of the exhaust that was in the way, giving the engine enough room to turn on the jack. And with a bit of struggle, we were eventually able to pull this engine out. After years of sitting still, the heart of this Beetle is finally out. This engine has been replaced before, but it's never been understood. But that's about to change, because we're now going to fully disassemble this engine for the first time. With the engine out of the car, there's still plenty to disassemble. Working on the floor isn't ideal, so our main goal now is to remove all the accessory parts and strip the engine down to just a long block. That way, it will be small and light enough for us to fully lift and take to the workbench. Since this is our first time working on a Beetle engine, we're just going by side, starting with the exhaust, which takes up a lot of space and wraps around the engine because of the heater pipes running all the way to the front of the car. One thing we noticed right away was that none of the bolts were overly tight or rusted. That might be thanks to the many engine swaps this car had over the years, or simply because it's been stored in a heated garage for the past 20 years or so. Either way, it made removing the parts much easier, though we still had to pay close attention to how everything was connected. That felt like a small victory, because with most older cars everything's rusty and bolts tend to snap at the worst possible moment. And another advantage of this Beetle engine is how lightweight it is, making it relatively easy to lift it a bit to work on the underside, even when working on the floor. Who needs an engine lift when you got a Pascal and some jack stands, right? Yes.
Ew.
Next up was the clutch, which of course has to be loosened evenly, bit by bit. One thing we already knew but could now confirm was that this clutch had been replaced not long before the engine was parked. That meant it was still in almost new condition.
Or can you pull it off?
I'm trying, but no.
Maybe with this. Yeah, look where you gotta put it in between. I don't think we'll find the spark.
Yeah. Give me a sec. Okay, that pulley didn't want to come off right away, so we decided to leave it for now and come back to it once the engine was on the workbench. I did cut the drive belt since we'll be replacing it anyway, so we wouldn't be needing this one anymore.
Niet? Nee, draait niet toch? Wel, yes. Yeah! Push!
Next up, we decided we wanted to remove the fan shroud, or that's how I believe that part's called. Now, I must be honest, we also had no clue how to disconnect it, so we just decided to loosen all of the screws that seem to be connected to it. Turns out there's also some parts connected to it on the inside, but I guess we'll have to figure out how to reconnect those later. And with that out of the way, we could now go and easily remove parts such as the carburetor that was a little stuck. You mocking me? You mocking me? Thank you.
So Yeah, this is this is like how it's supposed to be, right?
Yes.
Oh, there's a fuel.
Fuel, yes.
Maybe we should.
I want to reuse it.
Maybe we should shorten it a bit. Oh, that's easy. What the fuck, man?
At this point, we were mainly focused on removing the last remaining accessories and slowly working our way down to just a long block. And even though neither of us had ever worked on a Beetle before, the process actually went smoother than we expected. A big part of that was simply taking our time. Even if you don't see it in the video, we took a lot of pictures along the way. Not because we were so unsure, but because we wanted to make sure we'd remember exactly how everything was routed and connected when it came time to put it all back together. And honestly, this is where it really started to feel different from just swapping another engine. Instead of rushing to get it running again, we could actually stop and look at things. These parts might look strange compared to what we're used to, but taking them off one by one already teaches you a lot about how this engine works. It's such a different layout from the Volvos we usually work on, and that's exactly what makes it fun. Every step feels like you're learning something new, just by paying attention. And maybe the best part of all of this is that we're doing it together. Figuring things out, double-checking each other, and slowly turning what used to feel unfamiliar into something we understand. Because this time, we're not just trying to get the car back on the road, we're actually getting to know it. The last thing left to remove was that funny looking little cooler that just sits there on top of the engine. Once that was off, we were finally down to just a long block. And with that, we could move the engine over to the workbench and continue the disassembly from there. And this is where a flat 4 engine really starts to make sense when you're working together. With the engine on the bench, we could each take a side and start disassembling it at the same time. The first things to come out here were the spark plugs, followed by the clipped-on valve cover, which I have to admit might be the easiest part I've ever removed on an engine. Next up are the rocker arms that are being kept in place by just 2 bolts that I undid bit by bit. With the rocker arms out, we can now remove the push rods that we do want to keep in order, so we're using a little piece of cardboard to poke them through. It did get a bit messy with all of the oil dripping out, but you know, tearing down an engine is never the cleanest job in the world.
Oh, this is a long one. Wow, there it is.
In theory, we could have gone straight to removing the piston jogs, but we decided to take the studs out as well. It's one of those jobs that's always a bit fiddly and time consuming, so we figured it was better to deal with it now. To get them out, we used the classic double nut method, tightening 2 nuts against each other, then turning the one closest to the case to back the stud out. And after that, it was time to remove the piston jogs, which came out very easily with some wiggling.
Cool.
Of course, this goes for all of the parts. We do want to put everything back to the exact same place it came from. So we're marking the piston jogs with a screwdriver. And of course, the crankshaft pulley came off easily the moment the camera was off, letting us remove the small cover behind it too. Now it was time for the pistons. I removed the small clips that hold the wrist pins in place, after which we carefully tapped the pins out while Pascal supported the piston to avoid putting unnecessary load on the crankshaft. This was probably the strangest part of the teardown for us, because we're used to removing pistons and conrods as a single assembly. But with this being a flat 4 instead of an inline engine, this is simply how it's done. With the pistons out, it was time to remove the flywheel. And I could feel we were finally getting close to the heart of the engine. The moment Pascal and I had really been looking forward to. A quick search online told us that the last thing we needed to remove before splitting the engine was the oil pump, and that's exactly where we finally seemed to run into a real problem. Alright, so we've just encountered our first big problem, because it turns out you need a tool to pull the oil pump, and we don't have that tool because we didn't know that beforehand. So I'm gonna go look for that tool and then I'll get back to you to pull the oil pump and then remove the rest of this part of the engine. Alright, I am back without the tool I was talking about, because I went to my machine shop where I usually go to bring all of my engine components, and I asked the guy if he had a tool for me to borrow, and he told me you don't need a tool because he has done a lot of these engines in the past, and he told me I can just split this engine without removing that oil pump first. So we're just going to try that, and hopefully he's right, but I'm pretty sure he's right. Okay, so technically you do need to remove the oil pump before splitting the case, but what I really meant was that we could start splitting the engine and then carefully wiggle the pump out as we go without needing any special tool. Pascal and I got started on undoing all the bolts that hold the case together, and it quickly became clear that there were quite a lot of them. Some were a bit more stubborn than others, but nothing too difficult. A few were hidden under layers of dirt and grime, so we really had to pay attention and make sure we didn't miss any. It was one of those moments where you realize just how much goes into holding an engine together, and it gave us a good sense of the work ahead before we could finally open it up. Even though it looked like we were practically there. Even though it was highly unlikely, we were still a little nervous that the engine might just fall apart if we removed all the bolts at once. Plus, we wanted to see if we could get the two halves to start separating at all, so we began gently tapping them with a hammer. That first tap didn't do much. We were just too eager, and there were still a few bolts left to undo. Since the engine didn't seem to fall apart after all, we decided to remove all of the bolts we just loosened. Once we had removed all of them, we remembered the oil sump plate, which of course also holds the two halves of the case together. After taking that off and giving the engine a few more gentle taps, we were finally able to slide out the oil pump I mentioned earlier. But even then, that wasn't the only thing keeping the engine from coming apart. Alright, so we've been hammering for quite a lot of time, because we thought we've removed all of the bolts, but we just found a hidden nut under all of this dirt. So hopefully, when I get this out, we can split this engine. This nut was hidden under a thick layer of grease, and the placement next to the other bigger nut may be a bit odd, but yes, we should have seen it. But with that last nut being undone, the moment of truth was finally there. Could we now go and split this engine? Well, the answer is yes, but there was still a little restrainer type of filter in the way. But with that out of the way, we could finally split this case, revealing the actual heart of this engine. Now, of course, with the engine just split, we still cannot see the conrod bearings that are supposed to be the problem of this engine. But what we can see is a lot of metal residue on the camshaft, so that's a problem already. So I'm really curious what we will find once we've removed the conrods. First, I pulled out the camshaft, which was just setting loose, and found even more metal flakes on it. Next, we carefully started loosening the bolts on the end caps that hold the conrods in place. And the first one came off with the bearing still on the crankshaft. Well, as you can see, this conrod has turned all blue, meaning it has gotten way too hot, probably causing this engine to die. As you can see, these bearings have definitely seen better days. To get the conrods on the other side out safely, we decided to quickly reassemble the engine just enough so we could flip it over without any parts falling out. crankshafts out, and with that we've disassembled the entire engine. Alright, so these are all of the parts that I'm going to take to the machine shop tomorrow. And then next week, hopefully, I'll be back to rebuild all of this. And I must say that I am a bit nervous because looking at all of these parts, I'm not 100% sure we can fix it. But I think we'll be fine. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!